Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video is part 55 in the Crunchy Cobra Jet series. Now you may notice I'm wearing a sweatshirt right now. The temperatures have dropped dramatically here in Georgia and that affects things. I'm still planning to get paint on the car, but there's several things that I need to address, as you already know, in order to get it ready to go. And I have been working on the fenders. And I've stripped off the inside of the right side fender, passenger side fender, and there's a few things that I need to fix on that to make sure it's all ready. And I want to point out some things. As I'm going to show you in the time lapse, I'm using the SCT, surface conditioning tool. I'm using a wire wheel. I'm using a variety of things to clean the inside of this fender. Now it does have rust. It has surface rust. And yes, in most cases, it would be best to take this and get it media blasted somewhere, but I just don't have that option. Also, when I'm doing these videos, I'm trying to demonstrate what you can do in your home shop. Not everybody has access to a sandblaster or media blaster or high-end tools, so most of my stuff is for the home user. So pay attention to that, and you may be able to get some benefit from doing it yourself in your own garage. Now, the inside of these fenders had, again, surface rust. There was some old primer on there and a variety of things. For the most part, I'm not going to worry about the old primer if there's no rust showing. Now, I did go over it. I'm going to go over it some more. But I plan to treat the inside of that rust, or that inside area of rust, and afterwards I will spray it with epoxy primer, and that should lock everything in and won't cause any problems later. So let me show you what's going on with the fender. So you already know I've stripped the outside of both fenders. This one I'm going to have to weld up the holes where it at one time said Mustang or something to that effect. This car did not have those, so I'm going to have to weld those shut. Not a big deal. This fender, again, I have stripped the outside previously, and the inside, it had rust in this area. But you can see I've went over that with the SCT. I've gone over it with the wire wheel, and I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing. Once I treat this with the rust inhibitor, that all gets locked in. It's not going to allow it to develop more rust. That's the way that stuff works. So once I get that taken care of and I get epoxy on it, it'll be good to go. I've gone around. I've still got a little more to do up front here. I'm going to take all this off and expose all of that area. This inner part here has actually got paint on it, and there's nothing wrong with it. I may sand some of that down and smooth it up, but that's all behind the headlight bucket. You won't see it anyway, but it will get painted regardless. Now, one thing I did notice, it's missing a piece of metal right here. There should be a little tab, it looks like that, on this side. So I'm going to have to make just a simple little patch, put that back together. And one thing I just kind of don't like is this section right here. Now, this is an original Ford fender, and you can see they just folded that over. I'm not going to mess with that. I'm not going to take a hammer and beat that down. I don't want to change the shape of this at all. But I know that there are only a handful of welds. Like, here's some spot welds, and we know there's some spot welds up here. In this section, it's almost like there's nothing holding it. I mean, it's got a weld, welds down here, but there's nothing making contact with this inner piece. So it's hard to demonstrate, I can flex this around a little bit, which is okay, but I don't know that I'm going to leave it like this. I'm not sure just yet. I'm going to look at some other fenders. I may just put some tack welds here just to tighten it up and make sure it's going to stay. Again, I do not want to hammer that down because I could damage the outer area here, and I don't want to mess that up. So I still have this fender to do. It doesn't seem to need any extra work other than the inside getting stripped out like I've already done to this one. And then I will take the DA sander for the most part and sand down these vent openings. This one's already bare metal. This extension will need to be sanded and smoothed up. And then the other things are, where did I put them? The mirrors, as I mentioned before. So these all need cleaned up. So I have both of those. Some other small parts. This front brace, will need to get cleaned up and primed. And I don't know where I put the other mirror. It's around here somewhere. But that's the process that I'm in right now. So I'm going to continue to work on these fenders, get them ready to go. Once I get everything taken care of on the inside and let it dry, then I can put the epoxy on. I should point out that currently it is only about 67 degrees in the shop, and it's a little cool to be applying some of this stuff. So I'm going to have to just take advantage of the cool weather and the open door and strip off what I can. Alright, so here is where that piece was broken off. A couple ways you could fix this. You could actually cut that off, make a new piece and weld it in, or you could just make a little filler. So what I ended up doing was take this piece of scrap, put it behind there, traced what I needed and traced the hole, then I drilled the hole and then cut out that piece. So essentially I replicated that with this little piece of metal. Now this may be a bit of a challenge. It shouldn't be. I got a little sharp point I got to take off right there. And let me deburr this a little bit. Like I said, there's a couple ways you could do this. I could have just started to build up weld and reshape that to what I wanted, you know, with weld. But this is going to be better. So I always make the piece a little bit oversized too, just so you know. Try to. There we go. That should work. So this is the driver's fender, as I mentioned. I've got 3 holes here. And normally when I fill a hole like this, I just go hit against the inside edge and just keep tacking until I build it back. You could put a piece of brass or something underneath here if you wanted to, or copper, to try to hold up the weld. But for me, I just get at a low angle and just start filling it and walking it back toward me. Now there's still some junk on the back side. That's why I was making the sputtering a little bit. I don't know if I got that angle good. So I'm going to grind this off and see what it looks like. So I can see where I still have a little bit of edge showing on that backside, but now I have something to build against. Basically, that's the process. You know, you got some other little defect showing, go ahead and tack weld that back in, grind it back down. Alright, so I've gone over the inside of both fenders, and while there was surface rust like in these areas, a lot of this still has the red oxide primer on the backside. And so I'm not going to take all that off. There's no value in removing that at this point. Where it did have the rust, I did make sure it was cleaned up, removed all the loose rust, and now what I want to do is prep it. And I'm going to use some of this Loctite Naval Jelly Rust Dissolver. And the way this works is you brush it on, you let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes, and then you rinse it off. And then repeat if there's still some rust in those areas. So I've done this before. All I want to do is seal up any rust that's there, and then this will get top coated with epoxy, because in 24 hours, within 24 hours of applying this is ready for primer or paint. There's some other stuff in here that is kind of interesting. There is this brush on coating right here, and there's some in this forward section. Again, I'm not going to remove any of that. There's no value in completely stripping this. Yes, if you had the option and you could get this media blasted, that might be a benefit. But the way I see it, if there's nothing underneath this, there's no rust underneath any of this red oxide material, there's no value in removing it. So leave it sealed, take care of all the other areas, and then get it back in epoxy. So I'm getting very close to spraying epoxy on the outside of the fenders. As I mentioned before, I have treated the rusted areas with a rust seal product, and so all the rust is locked down, not going to come back, and I need to get epoxy on both of them. Also, I've been working on the stuff like the mirrors, so I have completely, as much as I can, stripped off all the old paint from the passenger mirror, and also working on the driver's mirror. Now I also taped up the cable, and I put a plastic bag around the mirror itself because I don't want to have to take any of that apart. So that's going to be good to go here shortly. The vents, I've continued to strip off all of the paint inside and out from every angle that I could come up with. And as I mentioned before, there's an indent right here on both of them. And I believe that's just the way they were cast. This one's even worse. So I will build this up, and I'll probably use that aluminum filler that I've used before on the quarter panel seams. So I'm going to do that, and I have used it right here on this location. There was a big dent right there, and as I said before, you can't reshape pot metal. So I cleaned all that up really well, and I filled it with that aluminum filler, and so that's going to take care of that. I also sanded off most of the primer that was on there, and of course the other one, it was already stripped, but I went over it with the sander as well. There's a little low spot that'll need attention. So this is all very close to being an epoxy, and I know I have these to do, but I may end up just spraying all of this stuff at one time along with the fenders. I need to get all of that apart. So there's trim pieces, there's headlight pieces, there's wiring, there's all kinds of stuff on those. And I may do it, I'm not sure just yet, but I'm going to try to get all of it together. But just for short term and simplicity, I may just spray these pieces and the fenders and then move on from there. So as I mentioned, I had put some of the aluminum filler in this passenger side quarter extension, and I have these low areas here. I've already cleaned these up pretty good, and I'm just going to mix up some more of this stuff. And again, the challenge is getting the color all the way through, and you can't really see the change. It's pretty subtle, so I mix it and mix it and mix it until I feel like I've got it thoroughly through. You know, it's easy with the other stuff because it just shows a dramatic change, let's say, a more dramatic change than what this does. And I'm going by my experience of knowing that this stuff, if you mix up a regular mix of filler, that it may take you, 30 swipes, 40 swipes, whatever, 2 minutes of time to get it all thoroughly mixed through. So that's kind of what I'm, I guess, subconsciously doing, is letting a little timer run in my head that tells me, hey, that's enough. And that's probably pretty close right there. So I'm going to put some on this one in particular because it's got the lowest spot compared to the other one, and there's a low spot here, and I don't know exactly what, if the castings, whatever the mold they use for these things, don't do a good job, or what, but there's definitely a low spot on both of these. And I'm not trying to make it perfect at the moment. I'm just trying to fill them in some so I can sand them down later. And then if I need to, I can add some regular filler to get a more consistent shape. And then I need to add some on this one just to fill in a little more of that low spot. It's always tricky on a curve too, because the paddle wants to make a straight edge, obviously, and this stuff is very, very creamy in a sense, so it doesn't gum up kind of like the regular fillers. You can take a paddle and run it across with the regular filler and it kind of just hangs in there, whereas this just it'll push right out of those low spots. So you got to be kind of careful with the application there. But that's probably about as much as I'm going to do at this point. And then I will shape these more by hand, and if I need to, as I'm sure I will add more regular filler on top of this. Let's see how this goes. It's not bad. Still need more filler, but at least now it's filled up a lot. Now I want to be careful and not dig out too much of this. I want to have a nice smooth transition. So I'll probably scuff the inside of these little low areas with some 80 grit, and then refill this with body filler, regular body filler. But I think it's going to work out fine. Same way there, little low spot. A little more hand sanding, add some more filler, that'll be good. And basically the same thing with this, just reshaping it. That's pretty close. So I can see I'm breaking through in a couple spots here. That's where I'll stop. I'll add another skim coat of regular filler and resand it. Much better. Well, let's see if I mix this up too hot. Sometimes I do that. Mix it too hot and it cures too quickly. Leave that one go. Let that one sit. And do a wipe on this. It's always tricky on areas that have basically compound curves. So I'm shaping the paddle just a little bit to try to mimic that. Good enough. Now that I have the filler on the way I want it, we'll knock it down a little bit with some 80 grit. The DA sure makes quick work of that. I like it. Now, of course, I'll go over this with 180. Make sure I get the shape the way it's supposed to look. Clean up any edges, that sort of thing. If I need to add some more filler, I will. But these will clean up really nice. So I'm pretty happy with how that looks. I'll do the same on this one. And of course, this extension will need the same attention. And again, as I said, I'll be taking the 180 Just making sure the shape is right. Gently go over this corner because you don't want a sharp edge. This has a natural roundness to it, so just kind of gently round that off. Get that transition the same. There we go. That's ready for primer. All right, I have mixed up my epoxy. I've let it sit for about a half an hour. I'm getting ready to spray it again with the Master Elite Pro 88 spray gun, 1.4 tip. And this is just to get epoxy on the fenders and the other pieces that I have ready. So I'm going to mask up and go spray. I have the epoxy on all of these pieces, and they look pretty good. Now I know there is still dents and dings in these fenders that will have to be addressed, but I'm happy to have the epoxy on. Mirrors look good. I got the inside. And of course I have talked about the dents and dings in the fender, or both fenders. This one has a little more work than the other one, but I'm happy to have the epoxy on everything right now. So I'm going to take advantage of the warm temperatures, and I'm going to let this dry a little bit longer, but I'll mix up the high build primer and spray it tonight yet, and then we'll take another look at it after all that is on. Well, at this point, I was able to put 2 coats of high build primer on these pieces and parts, and for the most part, everything looks pretty good. Now, I will point out, there's stuff that's hard to see, but there's a little like dent right there. I know there's at least one other spot on this fender, like here's a little low spot, and sometimes it's hard to see these things. There's even maybe a little bit right there, but stuff like this extension, this is the one I did the filler work on. I missed an area. So stuff like that really kind of stands out once you get some primer on these parts. And this fender, as I mentioned before, you know, you can look down the side of it and see all these little dents, dings. So there's a spot there, and there's more down here. This is kind of messed up. There's a spot up here on the top arch. So it's going to take some work to get all this smoothed out. Oh, that was the other thing. This fender, and I know the light isn't necessarily showing it, there's a few low spots right here. But at this point, I'll be able to put on the guide coat and go over these and sand them down. These are probably going to need more work than anything else at this point, because as you know, all the rest of the stuff is pretty much new, right? Well, what I need to do as well is mount the doors, get those in place, make sure everything lines up with the rocker and the body lines, and then as I'm working these parts and get them ready, I will have to test fit everything else. So I need to get the hood on, the fenders on, and get all that in place. So at this point, this is probably all I'm going to do on this video, because there's a lot more to do bodywork wise. Now I have the other extensions, the fender extensions out here, and these are going to take some work just to get them cleaned up. All this old paint that's in here, this is hard to get out. All these rings have to come off. Both these headlight retaining rings are broken. There are some pieces that I have not removed when this was taken apart. These came to me already off the car. So I don't know where the bolts are that bolt them to the fender. There's hardware inside here that has to come off that holds the boomerang piece, as it's called. All of this hardware here is pretty rusty. Springs are bad. You can see the corrosion on this. The wiring is probably, I don't know if I'd reuse it or not. It's very stiff. And I'll point out, you can look at stuff like this right here. There's a compression where this was probably assembled and that got pinched in between the edge of that. It like should be over here, and it hit something. So again, I don't know if I'm going to be able to use these or the wiring anyway. But it's going to take a lot of work to get all these apart, and that's something I will work on kind of maybe independent and get them ready for epoxy and high build as well. So that'll be the end of this video. Now, I did demonstrate quite a few things here using body filler, using epoxy primer, spraying it, that sort of thing, and I hope you found some useful information in that process. If you're interested in any of the products that I demonstrate, there will be links in the description below. The paint gun in particular, and any other parts and tools that I use, I try to put those in the description, so if you're interested, you can follow those links. Now, I want to thank you for watching, but I especially want to thank my patrons who continue to support me and help me continue to make these videos. I can't thank them enough, honestly. If you're interested in becoming a patron and helping out, there are links again in the description below. If you're not, that's fine, I understand. But once again, thanks for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya.